Whether you're a dedicated esports enthusiast or a creative working with ultra-high definition visuals, the graphics card is possibly the most important component in your computer. Unfortunately, it's also priced as such, making the search for the best cheap graphics card a difficult one. At 9.15 inches long, this is not a card that you'd want on your holiday gift list if you plan on building a pack-in-it in mini ITX PC. But all that extra space is effectively dedicated to larger fans and a longer heatsink, so we'll forgive the card for its burly stature this time around. The dual-slot card is protected by a full-length aluminum backplate for some extra passive cooling, just in case the two fans on top aren't enough to handle all the waste heat. The back of the Sapphire Pulse RX 5500 XT has 3 DisplayPort 1.4B ports and 1 HDMI 2.0 port, no sign of a DVI-D, like we saw on the GeForce GTX 1650 Super sample we tested from Zotac. As for power delivery, you'll need a single 8-pin power lead off a power supply with enough spare juice to deliver 130 watts to the card. Like the GTX 1050 before it, the Zotac GeForce GTX 1650 OC is about as no-frills as video cards come. The card itself is on the smaller side of the GPU spectrum, at just under 6 inches long and a little over an inch deep, but it will still take up 2 slots across in your PC chassis. So be aware of that before you plan your next build with it. The card has a very standard aluminum heatsink that supports a grooved blade plastic fan, and on the back you'll find one HDMI 2.0B port, one DisplayPort 1.4 output, and a dual-link DVI output. Because of the low power requirements for the GTX 1650, you won't need any power supply cabling plugged in to help keep this card running at full capacity. It draws all the juice it needs from its PCI Express X16 slot. The NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1660 Super is based on the same TU116 GPU as both the GTX 1660 and the GTX 1660Ti, but has the same 1408 CUDA cores as the original 1660. The big difference over the original graphics card is the bump up to GDDR6 video memory, resulting in a boost in memory speed from 8 gigabits per second to 14 gigabits per second. That's just as fast as the VRAM in the massively powerful RTX 2080 Ti. And, it's also important to note that this GPU doesn't have the RT and tensor cores that the RTX 20 series of Turing graphics cards have. This means that while you can technically enable ray tracing, it's going to turn whatever game you try to enable it on into a slideshow, more so than it does on any other graphics card. But, really, at the end of the day you can't expect a graphics card in this weight class to compete with graphics cards that cost twice as much. The GTX 1660 doesn't have RT cores, nor does the GTX 1660 Ti, so it only makes sense for the GTX 1660 Super to be limited here. Given that AMD isn't pushing a reference design for the Radeon RX 580, a wide variety of RX 580 models will define the card class. Like almost all cards in this class, it has a dual-slot cooler, and this model has a pair of fans. A metal backplate with some modest XFX branding occupies the entire back of the card. For a card in this performance class, this XFX 580 fairly large. It's about 3/4 of an inch wider than the stock Radeon RX 480, more than an inch longer, and slightly thicker than the stock previous generation AMD card, as well. One detail we were not fond of, the single 8-pin power connector on the XFX card is oddly recessed behind both the plastic fan shroud and under a metal heat pipe. This last detail is annoying from a reviewer's perspective, making the card slightly harder to install and remove. But for the average gamer who will install the card just once or twice in its working lifetime, this is a minor issue. Like the GeForce GTX 1660 Ti, the GeForce GTX 1660 is a mainstream waypoint between low-end NVIDIA cards like the GeForce GTX 1050 and the much pricier GeForce RTX line. The card carries all the benefits that NVIDIA made with its switch to the Turing architecture, while leaving behind the specialized tensor and RT cores that give the GeForce RTX line of cards their higher prices. As a base card, the Gigabyte GTX 1660 OC6G is predictably minimal in every sense of the word, from its design to its specs to the lack of added lighting anywhere on the card. The card itself measures 8.8 inches front to back, which makes it a good fit for most medium-sized desktop chassis, and it could even fit into a micro ATX case if you laid all your cables right. It requires just one 8-pin power connector from your PSU. On the trailing edge, we found 3 DisplayPort 1.4 slots, as well as one HDMI 2.0B. No DVI or virtual link ports here, as Gigabyte aims to cut down on costs by also cutting down on the number of connectors on the I/O backplane.